and important that we know the leverage we have as a community to talk about these issues and get into op-ed pieces and get into the media. A lot of times we running into what's happening at many universities and institutions around diversity and inclusion is that there's a lack of voice, especially from people of color, about how we are dealing in our day-to-day lives. Like we always talk about lived experience is important, and without that lived experience being told, there's a lot of assumptions that happen, which create space for microaggressions and racism and misunderstanding. But I think one of my most powerful experiences being in media is the work that we were able to do, even through the Hip Hop Summit Action Network a few years back when we brought Russell Simmons to the Carrier Dome to support Syracuse City School District students around literacy. uh, Having that voice and having that level of activism and having that visibility created a really opportunity for empowerment and inspiration for young people, to say that we actually do want to learn. You know, there's a lot of assumptions out there about black and brown kids that we are constricted to the four walls of our neighborhoods and really don't go beyond that. But we have two living examples here today, and an example in Natasha, about the work that she has done and her journey from literally Nottingham High School, going to Harvard, going to journalism school in Chicago. We talked yesterday with a group of Nottingham students, even about her experience at a hedge fund, trying to find her voice as she kind of grew up in navigating her professional career, to ultimately being the vice president of the GRIO, which is a black owned or about black news and media, and then being a political analyst at CNN. And so this journey is important, and we believe that the people in this room today, you all have a story, you all have lived experiences, you all have an opportunity to get your voice heard, and we want to be able to go to communities and make sure that we are empowering them with the knowledge and the know-how and how to get your voice out there. Um, I can talk about even here at Great Evangelical, growing up here in this very church, in this atmosphere, about how it is really a village that raises you as a child coming up. It is not just, I have wonderful parents. Parents are great folks in community, great community leaders. My godparents here, Pastor and First Lady Reed, who have been vital part of my success in my own personal life. But even having that voice, even having that story being told is important, because they look at young black men like me and say, we all on the corners. We don't have anything else that we can look forward to. But knowing that I have an individual story, I have an individual voice, I too can make sure that I put myself out there. And so tonight is going to be an evening where we will have a question and answer, and we'll have like some intimate time for us to kind of talk about these issues and topic of discussion. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we give opportunity for Pastor Reed to just offer some greetings to everyone, to just say hello. I'm glad to be home. So I'm just so glad to be here. And so at this time, Dad, just come up and say just a couple words, greet the people, and then we can get started with our program.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you and good to have you here this evening. I am Pastor Kenneth Reed, the pastor of this little church, and we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you, Natasha, coming and doing what you do and sharing what you do here. We welcome you to this little church, Greater Evangelical Church of God in Christ, and we thank you for coming. And we pray that your time here would be a time that would be blessed and edifying for each one of us. And I believe it will, because I think sometimes in the media we are, there's this kind of a dispersion cast sometimes, and that needs to change. Uh, and I believe that with knowledge it will. So we appreciate you being here, and thank you so much, and enjoy. God bless.
It's important. Well, thank you, Melissa, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. You cannot see the face behind the mask, but there's a very big cheesy grin underneath here. It's an honor to see you. There are people who have literally helped raise me from my church, and also from programs like Delta Academy. And now I'm a new mother, so I know what it means to work all day and then after work come out and choose to be somewhere. So it means so much that after your long day and all the things that you had to do today, you chose to be in this space with us and to share in community. So I think memories of the South Side, honestly, are there's so many like different stories, right? Riding my bike through the valley. My family actually, our family home is on Garfield Avenue. How many of you are familiar with Garfield and that side of town? And really sitting on my grandmother's porch is probably one of my favorite memories because in that neighborhood, the Alford family, we were one of the first African American families to own a home in that neighborhood. And so my family witnessed this change where, the inner city or the city of Syracuse in certain neighborhoods that were predominantly white, very slowly over time, there was this shift, right? Which we now, from a policy standpoint, we call it white flight. But what it meant to own a home, I think that was a point of pride. And my grandfather, he worked at Crucible Steel. My grandmother, she worked, in the kitchen over at Loretto. And so they were very much a part of the community. And so to sit on the porch, of that house, jump roping with my cousin, just knowing what it meant to be a part of that history of the city, I think that meant a lot to me. And it gave me a sense of roots and home. And for so many of us, our families come from different places. So my family came from Mims, Florida, in South Carolina, and they came up to Syracuse because they were looking for opportunity. And maybe, again, you may be one of the first African American families in a community or at an organization, but we took such pride in being the first and being pioneers and building our own communities and owning businesses and all of these things that as often as the media can focus on the negative or talk about the things that are wrong with the city, there's a really deep, rich history of pride and ownership and leadership and making a difference. And so I love being home because that's what it brings back to me.
So throughout your career, I'm wondering how this place and those views inform your worldview, your priorities, and even the stories that you decided you wanted to tell.
Mhm. Well, I think that, and I said this when we were at the high school, when you are a young child of color, I'm African American and I'm Puerto Rican, and you grow up in a city where people tell you constantly that there's high concentrations of poverty, or they're telling you about the negative things, and you're somebody who likes to read. I would go down to the library in the valley and I just love to consume books. I read Goosebumps and, R.L. Stein, all those books. And I remember going to OCC and doing a speaking competition. And Jackie Robinson, right, the legendary anchor, she was the one who handed out the medals for that competition. And it was like meeting Oprah, like that, changed my world. But when you are that type of kid, sometimes you feel that there's not really a place for you, because what you do see celebrated is students who are athletes, right? Or students who have like a musical talent. And that is a microcosm of sort of the macro message that gets pushed out to young children of color, is that to succeed, you have to be in industries like entertainment, or you have to be an athlete in order to make it on a bigger level. And so I think initially I felt invisible. I knew maybe I want to go to college one day. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I was told that I was creative, but you don't really know if the dreams that you dream are possible. But fortunately, I had teachers who did say, you will be someone one day, and they continue to invest in me. Programs like Delta Academy, where they took young girls from ages 11 to 14, and we go up to Percy Hughes on a Saturday morning, and we learn about how do you eat at a dinner table. I mean, no one had taught me those things, but we learned about etiquette. We learned about community service. We learned about magazines like Essence. I didn't even have a subscription to that until I started going to that program, and I saw images of beautiful Black women who then gave me a sense of what to aspire to. I learned about HBCUs, and my dream was to actually go to Spelman. A lot of people don't know that, but that was my dream school. I wasn't able to get enough scholarship money to go. So I think those are the things that gave me a sense of possibility, even though I initially felt invisible. And it was the community that put on programs like the oratorical competition for the National African American Parent Involvement Day right over at Clary. And I did my first oratory competition, won that competition, got some scholarship money, and then realized this is the thing that I can continue to do. And it was a columnist named Sean Kirst. I don't know if anybody in this room remembers Sean, but Sean, would write stories about me in those competitions that I then ended up using when I applied to college. So it just feels like Syracuse literally groomed me for success. Everybody sort of gave a piece, right, of an investment in me, and made me feel that whatever I wanted to accomplish in the world, eventually I could get there. And so that's really, the beauty of the journey.
I don't know if it was shared that the mayor officially recognizes me this week as Natasha Alford Week. So, you're lucky to
No,
share.
I'm lucky. I was a mess when I got that proclamation. I wasn't expecting it.
So, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And but I want to take aside you about all the amazing experiences you've had with students this week.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if one moment stands out, and kind of thoughts about those interactions
Mhm.
in terms of things that should be addressed and needed, or things that you can do in the community to better support um, students in
For sure. So we went into high schools this week and we spoke with the young people. And I think the one thing I would want the larger community to know is that many of them are trying, but they're struggling, right? I spoke with one student who just explained that She had all these extracurriculars. She was going to school, but she had no motivation. And so think about it. We as adults, I feel like I'm just turning into an adult, to be honest, but as adults, we have struggled in this pandemic. We have had our moments of feeling like this is absolutely too much, trying to find our way forward, trying to sort of hold together all these responsibilities. And think about being a young person at this time when you're trying to make sense of the world. And there's so many leaders who are not acting as leaders, right? Who are not sort of representing the values that the country says that we cherish and that we hold dear. And so she talked about just feeling like she had no motivation and she didn't know what to do. And there were so many young people who felt that way. And so I think that's a call to action for us as the adults, right? As the sort of caretakers and the ones who are supposed to be giving, the next generation some sense of hope, that it's not just about programming and it's not just about, sort of talking down to our students or telling our students that they need to do better, but really like caring for the spirit, which is why I'm glad that we're at a place like this, right? We're at the church, because for me, the church actually was like a game changer. Being introduced to my local church opened up a new world for me. And it really influenced the decisions that I made that led to success, that led to me being able to go on and sort of build this career and this life that I've always wanted. And so I think that as much as we talk about grades and report cards, we need to be thinking about the souls of the young people, right? And thinking about how we can invest in them in that way, but also how can we temperature check to see where our young people really are, to take the time to listen to them, to understand what they feel and what they need. I'm glad you feel that way because I'm just speaking. I'm just speaking from the heart. I hope it makes sense. I hope it resonates.
So speaking of your career, I wanted to ask you about some of the more notable experiences that you had as a Black reporter in upstate New York, and maybe share some of your challenges, successes, and thoughts on the importance of diversifying your news.
That's a great question. So I think sometimes when we see the, reporters on television, we assume that this is somewhat of a glamorous job. But the reality is that it's the opposite. It's really a difficult industry to be in general. But as a Black reporter, you have the pressure of sometimes feeling as though you're a token, right? So often, stations will have one Black reporter. So that's the first problem to begin with, right? They think that because they have one Black reporter, they're doing enough around diversity or that they are truly representing a community. And it's about more than skin color, too, because you also have to have a connection to the community, right? It's not about just being a Black reporter, it's understanding the dynamics of what is going on in that community and the history. Um, it's a low paying job in the beginning, to be honest. A lot of folks who have maybe worked in other industries take a pay cut when they go into media. It's not as if everyone sort of becomes like, Robin Roberts overnight. In fact, a lot of people struggle. In the same way that teachers sometimes have second jobs, reporters will have second jobs. I remember working many side hustles when I was a reporter trying to make it. And I think what was hard when I was reporting in Rochester was this was when we were seeing the Baltimore uprising and what happened with Freddie Gray. And I'd go out and I'd tell these stories. I'd go to Black Lives Matter protests, and I worked so hard to do, a really fair and balanced story. And then I would look in the comments, and the comments were calling Black Lives Matter protesters animals and, less than human, and people just saying the cruelest, most vilest things on the internet. And I'm like, is this my audience? Is this is who I'm serving? I'm doing this journalism, right, for a mass audience. I'm trying to represent for the community, and I'm being met with such hatred. Um, and so, I think that there's actually a lot of pressure that you feel when you're a reporter of color, because you are trying to be fair. And often there's an assumption that you can't be fair because you're a reporter of color. But if you were a white reporter, nobody would necessarily be questioning your neutrality, right? Because that is assumed to be the default, that is the perspective that is the standard. And so I remember going once to it was a school board meeting. If you want to see people get passionate and angry and hateful, go to a school board meeting, okay? Forget January 6th and the insurrection. Go to a school board meeting. I was in a suburb in Rochester, and there were some parents who were very angry that I think maybe like 9 kindergartners were coming from the city to their suburbs, to their school. There was some sort of transfer program that was allowing a small group of students to come. And I remember a man approached me pretty aggressively and asked me when I was there just doing my job, are you going to tell this story fairly? And I said, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I tell the story fairly? Right. And so those are the moments that, you know, you have to keep your cool. You have to stay calm. And I think we've seen some of these viral moments, on social media where a lot of Black reporters will face hostility and questioning and microaggressions, as Vince said, and they show up every day and they remain professional. And so, yeah, that's what I learned, the power of having thick skin, showing up, learning my craft and doing the craft well to let the work speak for itself. But that doesn't make it, easy all the time.
Speaking of, not everyone here is a journalist, but the continued portrayal and featuring Black trauma has been something that is routine media content. And I'm just wondering how that impacts you, how you navigate it, and any advice you might have for us about thinking about that, dealing with that.
Mhm. Well, it's true that it gets tiring, right? Because if it's tiring for you all, which I'm sure you're tired of seeing the same things over and over again, being the reporter who has to go out and talk to the mother who has lost her son or to the family members who are trying to move forward, that does kind of wear on your spirit after a while. And in the same way that school shootings have kind of become this routine for America, right? We go through these same motions every time. It's the thoughts and prayers. We get together, we do the candlelight vigil, and then no policy changes. As a reporter, that's what it feels like when there's another unarmed Black person who is killed, whether it's by police, official, law enforcement, or somebody who sees themselves as the police and they've taken that liberty to kind of be a vigilante. And so I think the goal or some of the struggle is still feeling, right? Not growing numb because you sort of build up a wall to protect yourself because you have to do your job, right? You have to file the story by deadline. You have to go on television. You have to be composed. Like there are all these things that you have to do when you're a storyteller. And at the same time, it's affecting you. You're thinking about your husband or your son being pulled over and what could happen to them in this environment. So you're feeling it on that deep of a level. And, I talked about what it was like sort of being the token Black reporter when I first was starting out and I was kind of doing local TV news. But then when you go into Black media, where I am right now, we're covering this all the time, right? We're talking about race all the time. And so it does become exhausting on the soul again, just sort of being a witness to that trauma, but I think it reminds you that you are human at the end of the day. And so a lot of Black reporters, we've been talking about self-care and the importance of therapy and having a space that has nothing to do with work where you find and you celebrate Black joy.
So, talk to us a little bit about your daily work at the Griot
Mhm.
and how the Griot fits in the larger media environment and what distinguishes it and makes it, a little different.
Great. So how many of you have heard of the griot? I'm just curious so I can kind of give a breakdown. That's great. Okay, so we got about half and half, which is good. So the griot was founded more than a decade ago. It was founded in 2009. And griot is a term that stands for storyteller. It's a West African term. And actually, it was Dave Chappelle talked about this and when he was winning the Mark Twain Prize. But a griot is essentially an oral historian. So you can walk up to this person and they'll tell you the stories of a particular community. It's literally a job because that's how important it is for us to remember in communities. And I worry sometimes that we forget or that people move into the community and they don't fully understand what the history is and there's something lost in that. But that's what a griot does. And so that's what we seek to do for the African American community. We talk about all the issues that you see on any mainstream news channel, but we also celebrate achievement. We amplify the voices of Black writers and Black journalists. We talk about owners and entrepreneurs. Uh, and we really are shifting the narrative and owning the narrative around the diversity in the Black community. So I love working there. I feel very much at home. And I feel that I'm part of a movement that's saying that it's not enough to just report about Black communities, but you have to actually own your media, right? Because then your stories are not being filtered through someone else's agenda, or someone saying, well, actually, this is what's more important, right? We are able to speak for ourselves. And so I think that's the importance of organizations like the griot existing.
You have so many accomplishments. I love that. But you're also a grantee from the Pulitzer Center.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a bit about some of the projects that you personally have worked on that have been the most gratifying.
Yes. So with the Pulitzer Center, I saw an opportunity, right? I think in this country, when we talk about Blackness, uh, we're always fighting this idea that Blackness is a monolith, right? That we all think the same way or that politically we lean the same way. Um, and there's sort of these one dimensional portrayals of our community. And so with the Pulitzer Center, I pitched a series about Afro Latinos. The reason why I would do something like that is because in the diaspora, we have brothers and sisters who literally look like us, right? Who are all part of the transatlantic slave trade, who are having parallel experiences. When you go to Puerto Rico, there are Puerto Ricans who same skin color as me, same skin color as you, who are being profiled by the police, who are being excluded from economic opportunity, who are not getting the same educational opportunities as lighter skinned Latinos who, over there the narrative is, oh, we're all the same, right? We're all part of the same community. We don't have those race issues like they do over in the continental US. But so they're dealing with a little bit of gaslighting, right? Because they have this sort of, and I'm generalizing a bit just to kind of summarize, but we're in a colorblind society. Well, the problem with that is that when you can say that, but you have structural racism in place that's still denying people opportunity and they have poor health outcomes, right? All these things that are very real that we can relate to, but we don't have these conversations. It's almost as if there's a wall there. So I pitched this series because I wanted to create space to talk about that, to talk about the things that we have in common, and to also remind people that we are connected. A place like Puerto Rico, which I have, roots in, is a colony essentially of the US. So what does that mean, right? The US still is colonizing this space. You still have people who are saying this is our island and it's not being run by the people of this island. We are having US policies imposed on us. We have hurricanes and we're still waiting for electricity months later, right? It's ridiculous. And so that is a conversation that we should be privy to and we should be a part of because it's part of what it means to live here in the US. Yes, and that's just a little bit of what I did, yes. Oh, I did a documentary too. I have to remember this. On YouTube, it's called Afro Latinx Revolution. It's also on Amazon Prime, and it's a 35-minute documentary that talks about some of these issues of Black identity in the Latino community, specifically in Puerto Rico. So definitely check it out.
So I'm going to let you know, we are, and everyone in this room knows, we are living in an age of fake news, misinformation, and
media literacy is a matter of life and death, literally a matter of life and death. Where you get your news from, understanding when somebody is selling you propaganda versus giving you something that's well researched, that's well intentioned. I mean, it's literally become a matter of life and death in this era of the pandemic, and that's what we're seeing. I think that sometimes people feel the news is something that happens to them, right? So it's like someone comes into your community and they say what your community is, but they actually don't consult you about it. Or a story goes up and it doesn't tell the full story of what happened because that reporter didn't talk to the right people. And so when that happens enough, it builds a sense of mistrust. And I know how that happened. I remember being a reporter, and here's what it is. You have really well-meaning people, but these systems are set up to not necessarily incentivize the best thing. So you come in as a reporter, you're on deadline, right? You're being told you have a show at 5 o'clock. Go down to this crime scene. You know what happens? You will get a press release from the local police department about what happened, right? You're expected to go talk to other people and dig deeper into that. But more often than not, what you hear on the news is just whatever the law enforcement gave in that press release about what happened. And so when you tell people that, that's the first impression of what a story is. Maybe the story, there's more to it, but people remember the first thing that you tell them. And so there's also a fear of talking to the media because if you talk to them and something you say is taken out of context, right? That's people's biggest fear is that they're misrepresented, that who they are, doesn't actually make it. And then it's too late, right? It doesn't make it into the public sphere and then it's too late. So I think that there are reasons why there's mistrust, why there's been a breakdown, and that these days bad actors have exploited that to say you can't trust the media at all anymore. So just listen to me, right? Listen to my blog, listen to my YouTube channel where I sort of just wax poetic about whatever I think, but maybe haven't necessarily done the appropriate research, right? Everyone talks about the research that they've done, but where are the actual sources? Like, can you tell me the primary sources that you looked at? And more often than not, when you really dig under the surface, it's paper thin. It's a lot of opinion without backing that up. And so I think that the environment that we're living in now with the doubts over the vaccine, hesitancy, but also not just hesitancy, which is understandable, but misinformation and disinformation that is actively trying to tell people to do things against their interests, that is costing people their lives right now.
The last time we spoke, it was very illuminating to me when you broke down the difference between a CNN analyst,
Mhm.
which you are, and a CNN commentator.
Mhm.
So I wondered
If anyone's curious.
if no one is doing those things,
Yeah.
but uh, I like hearing about the difference, and I think that that research and that reporting piece is critical. And so many people, as you point out, have a lot of opinions and very little reporting research. So
Mhm.
talk to me a bit about what that's like.
Yeah, well, I think that there are people who are known for their commentary, right? They're powerful speakers, they're really persuasive. Those are personalities that you see on television. I even think about, in these sort of right-leaning media, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, right? Those are commentators. They are giving you their perspective on the world, you know, uh, through their lens. But for me, I actually think stories speak for themselves. I don't need to tell people how to think. I don't really get excited by that. I have a lot of opinions that people don't know actually what my personal opinion is. But as an analyst, my job is to give people context. It's to say, based on my reporting, based on my research, this is how we can understand the news. And I think that that serves a purpose. Uh, there are times when I've been asked to give, political opinions or assessments of what's going on, but I really try to stay away from the sort of personal interpretation of whether I like a politician or whether I don't, and focus more on what people need to understand about the environment, about the legislation. Those are the things that people need to know. And I let the commentators do their thing, and that's cool too.
Um,
Yes. So this is a great question. For everyone in this room, I just want to encourage you to feel empowered to hold your media accountable, right? To feel free to introduce yourself to journalists. They are not people to be feared necessarily. I know that sometimes when I remember being young and being so intimidated by reporters or, talking to a journalist and feeling sort of scared. But the reality is they need you to do their jobs, right? This is an exchange of information. Uh, it's an honor when I sit with somebody and they tell me their story, right? I'm humbled by that. And I see it as a sacred privilege to get to be the person that writes about somebody's life or what happened to them. So that's the way that I treat it. But you should feel empowered to say, this media serves my community. So if they get something wrong, reach out to them and ask them for a correction, right? Or to say, hey, we're hosting this event. Can you all come and cover this? And if they tell you no, be persistent, right? And keep, informing those journalists of this is happening in our community. Can you please cover this thing? Because what happens is, again, those incentives that incentivize them to cover the blood and the saying is, if it bleeds, it leads, right? You can kind of understand what that means. If it's about violence, if it's about death, that's one of the top of the things you'll see, at the newscast. Journalists and reporters are influenced by how you react to that. So if you speak up and you say, we've seen all these negative stories every single day, what about this thing that we've been doing for the community or for the young people, right? Or this business that I've started, that's newsworthy. But sometimes we don't see ourselves or our initiatives as worthy of being on the news. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get people to shift in terms of their thinking, to say that they actually work for us. And so, in order to create balanced coverage, accurate coverage, they have to come and cover these things that matter to us. That's what I hope everybody does, that they go out feeling like they can reach out to and hold journalists accountable for the way their community is covered. Absolutely. We every morning we wake up like, "Ooh, what are we going to write about?" Certainly there's breaking news that sort of fills up our schedule, but we're always looking for stories. We're always looking for pitches and people to profile. So if you have an idea, you're absolutely welcome and you should be engaging your local press. And that's also a part of the Constitution, right? This is the First Amendment. We're talking about freedom of speech. You're participating, and journalists are participating in this very important, process. And this is also important for investigative journalism. If an injustice has been done to you and there are certain people who are not following up on that, within whatever realm we're talking about, work or, schools, and someone is not appropriately handling that, that is part of why the press can be an asset and can be a tool, right, to go and investigate on your behalf and to expose wrongdoing and hold people accountable. We hold the powerful accountable. That's our job.
I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask a question. I know you must have been written with so do you have anything?
Don't be shy. Hi, Miss Senior. Thank you. Thank you. Hmm.
This mask or something.
Hmm.
So
I
I
know.
followed your career, Natasha, from the time you went to Harvard, and then from there, I think you lived and worked in Connecticut, and
All
then
over the place.
yeah. And so I was so fascinated about how you've made that like a 360, and then you
Mhm.
went to graduate school
Mhm.
at Northwestern. And then I followed you when you were a reporter in Rochester. So it intrigues me how you have come, I think, full circle
Mhm.
in your career, and now with the grill, which I think I was getting, I was on their mailing list before you worked with them, so I was aware of the Griot,
Great.
and I enjoy reading that. So I was thinking about go back for a minute. You mentioned that you were at Nottingham this week, and talking to a young lady who, although she's involved in a lot of things, she feels, she lacks the motivation sometimes. And so I wonder, how to, and I work with students, older students than high school, but how do we keep them engaged? How can we motivate them? Because you're right, they do carry a lot more weight on them sometimes than we do, or at least than we give them credit for, or that we're aware of. And especially with this pandemic, it has really, really magnified itself. And so, how can we, as professionals in the field, continue to encourage our students to, to hang in there, so to speak? I know it's a very long question, but
it's an important question. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you asked, and it's really good to see you. It's
You
like
too.
having family in the audience. I think two things come to mind. With our young people, it is so important for them to know that regardless of how they perform, we care about them. And sometimes that performance is tied to a sense of my value or my worth, right? So if I do well and I bring home this report card or I do this, then I'm loved and then I'm cared for. But it's the unconditional support that really makes our young people feel they can come to us with the issues that they are struggling with. And you would be so surprised how many parents sit across from children every day, eating dinner, and they have no idea what they're dealing with. They have no idea the depth of the invisible worlds that are now on their phones. Oh my God, I can't imagine being in high school or middle school with the world of social media that exists. It sends them warped messages about what really matters, about their value, particularly for young girls. I mean, we've seen the research, right, about Facebook and Instagram. And so that sense of where can I go that I have unconditional love and support, that I can talk about my mistakes, that I can talk about the decisions that I'm wrestling with without a threat, right? I know that, culturally, there have been certain things that we have done to protect our children. So we say, well, don't talk back, right? Or we say there's certain practices that and I say we loosely because, I see this from both in Latino communities and African American communities where it's, strictness. My child will never do this, but your child will also never really tell you what's happening because of this sort of iron fist approach to discipline, right? So how can we create a safe space while also maintaining our traditions and our values and all of those things for our children to feel that they can open up to us? I think that is key with keeping our children motivated. And then also this, some of what I was saying earlier, showing them that we value more than the sort of traditional stories of success. So it's okay if you're not a superstar, soccer player or basketball player, or you sing in the choir or whatever it is. What is your gift? What is God giving you that makes you unique and special? And maybe it's something like service. Maybe you are really good at organizing food giveaways, right? And which is hard to do in this COVID era, but we need to have creativity around the things that we celebrate in our children. And I think when we have that, we will see each child as unique and special and having something to offer the world. We have to see it so that we can create space so they can see it too. And this is a Newhouse alum right here in the front.
Yes.
Newhouse and Nottingham alum. So it's good to see you.
As you said, Natasha, we spoke briefly, and basically my entire adult life, I've been a journalist. And the frustrating part, and I have to preface this by saying I was active member of the Syracuse Press Club for a number of years. I was the Free Press Committee chairman. So I'm a fierce defender of the First Amendment.
Mhm.
But my frustration and I know this is true for people that aren't journalists locally, um, having grown up here in Syracuse, where there were at one point 18 radio stations in Syracuse, for example, owned by 18 different companies or individuals. Now there are only 3 or 4 companies that own the radio stations. There were 2 newspapers in Syracuse, daily newspapers in Syracuse. Now you've got 1 and barely 1 hanging on. I wrote for the Syracuse New Times. That doesn't exist anymore. And we covered, this is when we were the alternative newspaper. We covered stories that the Syracuse newspapers wouldn't touch. So what I'm saying is the outlets are just not there. Radio, television, newspapers. So that's one of the biggest problems that I see right now is even if somebody wants to get a story out, how do they get the story out? Where do they go? How do they do it?
It is a reflection of what is happening in many communities. You think about independent radio, right? There were independent radio stations, or many of those were Black owned radio stations that got just bought up. And now it's one corporate entity that owns all of those things. So what you're highlighting is it's a huge problem in media. And I think that this is what I talk about when I say the importance of ownership. Because once there are these conglomerates who sort of own and pick up all these independent outlets, they control and can sometimes have a slant in terms of the way that they tell stories. I won't name one particular name, but there's one sort of TV conglomerate that has been seen as having sort of a right-leaning perspective, and so all their local news kind of has this slant to it. You know what I'm talking about. Sinclair. It's Sinclair. So I think it's a problem. I think that while this problem does exist, and there have been so many job losses and layoffs that are a part of this problem, the flip side is that media has also been democratized in a way, and that's through social media. So outlets like the Griot, we exist because of this digital revolution, right? And so we are able to build an audience on Instagram and on Twitter, on Facebook, where we have more than 1 million people who follow us and maintain a very unique and independent voice. And so I do encourage people right now to take advantage of some of the grant money that's being put out to support local reporting or to support independent outlets, because we have seen what happens when you strip local communities of diverse outlets to tell stories. And so now an investment is being, put back into that, so that communities can amplify their voices in a more dynamic way. So I think that, looking for funding, building a following, if you're an independent outlet on social media, and finding your audience is really key. And I think there's an organization called like Syracuse Black Owned. They're on Instagram. I know I follow them. And so they sort of fill this gap that previously existed where they highlight Black businesses and various Black entrepreneurs. I never saw anything like that in the paper, but they went and they created that for themselves. I definitely think that this is a time to create and to use technology to amplify the stories that we want to see. Oh, so you know what I'm talking about. Great. Awesome. I know I've been talking for a long time, so it's really good to hear from you.
Hey Natasha, thank you for coming back.
Good to see you again.
How have you seen Black leadership evolve through Syracuse? You speak a lot about leadership here.
Mhm.
How have you seen it through the years evolve?
Well, I don't feel as equipped to talk about recent years because I have been away, right? At this point now, I've been living in other cities just as long as I lived in Syracuse and growing up. And this is something that Vince II and I talk about. But we do feel that there was an era in Syracuse where you could look everywhere and see Black leadership taking place. We had leaders like Akua Goodrich and Julius Edwards who would come to our high schools and just talk to us. We hosted the hip hop summit at Syracuse University, where we took kids out of school and we went and they listened to rappers and different entertainers, and we had a whole summit. Those things, like, I don't think they happen as much anymore, and that breaks my heart. But we were in a time where there were Black principals and Black teachers like Brian Freeland. I mean, these people were like legends in the community. But what I think happens is that people get tired of being the only person constantly coming out and showing up and putting together programs. NAACP AXO, Afro Academic Cultural Technological Scientific Olympics. I can still say that to this day at 35 years old. That changed my life. Those kids don't have that now. I don't think AXO is around anymore. I think it was defunct for a period of time because people get burnt out. They cannot carry the entire weight of the community on their backs, right? And so, again, I don't want to speak to or criticize any current leadership who is trying to do something, because I celebrate the people who do more than they talk. But I do feel that something definitely shifted, and there are people who moved on. They moved out of the city, which is another problem, right? There are incentives to go other places with your talent, with your money, with your resources, if you aren't celebrated and supported in your work. So I will say that Black leadership is essential, that the young people are looking to see. Who wants to walk into a space and it's all young Black kids, but they don't see any Black teachers in charge? That is sending a message subconsciously about who actually has the capacity to lead. There's no reason why Black kids at Syracuse schools have not been up to SU. We met kids this week who never stepped foot on SU's campus, and it's literally up the hill. Seniors, what does that say about who feels that certain parts of the city belong to them versus this is a part of the city that I can't go to? We have that sense of ownership and entitlement to ask for certain things and to organize because that was cultivated at Nottingham. But not everybody has that. And so this next generation needs to see Black leadership in order to feel that this is a city that they can change and that there is a space for them here. Mhm. Mhm. Well, I certainly think we are having a moment, and it does happen, where we talk about race and diversity. There's like a ton of people who get promoted for a season, and then if they don't come in that already existed long before they got there, they get fired and they get replaced, and before you know it, the vibe is gone, diversity is gone. I am happy for promotions and achievements. I love to see people getting opportunities to make a difference. Those leaders set up for success. They need to actually have the power to make certain, right? Not just the title, not just the power, and the resources to make certain calls and decisions, with the organizations that they are running. So that is how you can make progress and move it if you're not truly committed to this on an institutional level, and it's just forever.
I actually had a question. Can I ask one? Sure. I'm really encouraged by your idea of journalism as activism, in the sense of making sure our voice get heard and holding media accountable. I like that you talk about, like, specifically pitching op-ed pieces, because I feel
Yes.
like there's something powerful in putting your story in your own words and putting pen to paper to actually tell your own story, as opposed to like someone kind of articulating or interpreting that for you in the media. Can you talk about what that process is like to kind of get that in a newspaper?
Sure. So I want to encourage everyone who's in this room, even if you're not someone who works in media, quote unquote, to see yourself as a person who has ideas that can change the world. your story, your life, the things that you have experienced, there is power in sharing that. And the way that people do this traditionally has been through op-eds. So that means that you reach out to a media outlet and you say, "Hi, my name is so and so, and I'd like to write about this issue for your paper. I would like to run an op-ed." We have seen op-eds about every sort of issue that you can imagine. And so you can do this in the local paper. I remember when I was 15, I wrote an op-ed about violence in Syracuse. Wow, that, how much has changed since then, right? But I wrote about violence in Syracuse and how it affects young people. That gave me the opportunity to be a published writer, right? And to address an issue that was affecting my community from my perspective. And so anything that you see in Syracuse or even beyond Syracuse, right, in the world, you can pitch an outlet and ask if they will run your letter to the editor or an op-ed. There are sites like the Grio, where I work, where people pitch us op-eds all the time. We've talked about everything from elections and voting down to natural hair, dating, any issue that is important where you feel like you have a powerful story or perspective, or you want to challenge people to think differently, you can do that in an op-ed. I encourage people to you don't feel like you have to write the whole thing all at once. The first thing that you do is you identify an editor at an outlet or a general email at an outlet, and you basically say, "This is what I'd like to write about. This is who I am. This is what makes me sort of, equipped to write about this issue." And pitch them and see if they will run your piece. Um, if you follow people on social media, that's a great way to get their contact information. Like, look for certain reporters and editors and say, "Hi, I'd like to write something." You can tweet at them and they can send contact information that way. The New York Times, if you look at their sort of op-ed or guest essay section, you can get an idea of the sorts of op-eds that are run. And of course, if you go to the Grio, you can see some of the op-eds that we run. If you email contributors at thegrio.com, so that's contributors at thegrio, you could pitch a story idea and just put in the headline, op-ed pitch from Syracuse. I will look for it, right? And I will respond. Um, but it's this is what we mean by participation. So it's one thing to critique the media, it's another thing to step up and say, "All right, I'm going to, do my part and highlight whatever issue is important to me." She's like, "I got this. I got this." Oh, that's why they okay.
Thank you. Hello. Okay.
Hi, good
This
to
is
see you.
loud. So I'm an instructor at Syracuse at Newhouse, and I'm so glad to finally see you.
Great
I've
to
heard
see
so
you.
much about you. Your conversations around going to the high schools,
Mhm.
and those students never been to Syracuse, that is very disconcerting.
Mhm.
Since you've visited those high schools, what do you think Syracuse or Newhouse can do to help make the students feel comfortable? Like, what are some of the things you think of the disconnect?
When we were at the high school this week, one of the students asked, because Newhouse was like hosting like an open house, and they said, "Is it like a field trip?" Because she was concerned about transportation, right? I know my mother personally, she didn't let me go anywhere. I mean, like, everything had to be officially and formally through a school or a program. I was not allowed to just walk around Syracuse for safety reasons. I was a girl. I mean, every household is different. And so for some students, they literally need a formal channel to be able to go up there and feel that they have a right to be on the campus. And so I think that what Newhouse can do is actually set up open houses and host days like when Vincent used to run the Empowering Minds Conference, where Syracuse City School District students would be bused and they'd be given lunch, right? And they'd be given a pass home if they were going to take the bus or if they were going to take, some other form of transportation. But all of the logistics were worked out so that the students could focus on learning and exposure and shadowing. And you would be surprised how many students don't have parents who have a car. in this city where you really kind of need a car to get around, right? All those things that maybe seem simple can be a huge barrier. And I think if we remove those barriers, and we also tell these students that Syracuse is in your backyard, Syracuse University is your home university, and that you have a chance of going here, those are the things that will make our students feel that they want to look to Syracuse as a destination. Mm-hmm. Right there. Mhm. Mhm. No, it's true. It's so true. And can I say something really quick, Melissa? It's not even just about SU. It is about living in upstate New York. There are things that I did not do in upstate New York until I was an adult college graduate because I didn't know that you could do them, right? Or things that I didn't get to do until my church invited me, like going skiing. There are so many kids who live in this community who don't get to experience the beauty of actually living in upstate New York because there's not a vehicle or program or pathway to do those things. And so they need that exposure. They need those opportunities to see this place as their home, right? And to see the beauty of their home. And again, not just to keep hearing the same things about the city and what the city doesn't have when they live in one of the most beautiful regions of the country. And all of that comes with exposure and education and intentional time spent with our young people.
So I have the mic again.
Yes.
I heard what you said about on that same topic. I work at the university at Syracuse, so I feel comfortable in saying this.
Mm-hmm.
That transportation is an issue, and our students in the community do realize that SU is in their back door for many of them. But the image that they have of the university is that it's not affordable, it's unattainable. If I had a quarter for every time a student said, I never thought I could come here, I could probably just retire. We, the university, we have to break through that image that students from this community can go there. We have to, give them hope that they can also go there. It's true, students do want to go elsewhere because they've grown up in this city and they want to move on elsewhere. But they also need to know and realize that Syracuse University can also be a college that they can apply to and get accepted to. And I think that's where we, as administrators at the university, we're failing on that.
And I think that, for me, we joke about I'm the one that got away, but I did want to go to graduate school at SU. Actually, when I graduated from Harvard, I tried to find a job in Syracuse. I did not get hired. Like I applied to things and just never heard back from people, you know? So there's a disconnect there because it's not because I'm like the only person that had certain skill set, but I'm from this community and I wanted to come home and it wasn't easy enough to do that. So what does that mean? Right? We we have to be intentional and strategic and think about the talent pipeline and how we can pour into people and they may leave, but how do we bring them back? Because I guarantee you there are people who want to come back home.
Hi, Natasha. I'm Mary
Hi.
Kuhn, and I was part of your early radio career in Teen
I
Talk.
remember. So good to see you.
And I've been following you also, and what an amazing trajectory of career you've had.
Thank you.
It's we all knew it was going to happen, but so fast, I don't know. I just want to amplify the conversation because that's what I was going to say earlier. Both the media, our media is pathetic, and the south side of the community is so poorly covered. The richness that does exist here is ignored in the face of the violence that happens all over the city. But there's a over focus here. But I'm a county legislator, so it's not just the university; it's our government too, in terms of the funding and the access to funds. Transportation is absurd in this community. We're seeing it now. You know, with kids can't get to school, and I can't tell you the number of people that have said, "Well, why don't their parents just drive them?" Because they don't have a car. But there's just an ignorance, I think, because this. But what I wanted to say though is the university has, as somebody in politics, I'm covered more by Syracuse University than I am by our media because people have to write stories and whatever, but they're good. And the university has done a wonderful job of covering issues of poverty and the community grid and the history behind that. And that's where I would think that's where I was getting to. The schools, it almost seems like from what you were talking about, getting stories out. The students in Nottingham and Henniger, they have amazing stories to tell, and it would be good if there was some sort of connection with the university, even the students, because the students to a college student to a high school student, it would be much more accessible, and to get those stories out and to make those students recognize what you had the opportunity. I don't know where AXO went, or even the oratory thing that was so amazing, and we don't have that anymore. So kids don't see, they don't see what they can do. Anyway, thank you for all that you have done and continue to do. It's so exciting.
Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I would just say real quick, as a Syracuse University alum, I think it does not get talked enough about the opportunities for especially students of color to get into Syracuse University through programs like Higher Education Opportunity Program, HEOP. They have another program, I think it's called SAS. SSS, and then even the Say Yes program, I don't know how active it is now, that gives opportunity for students to actually get in. And so me stepping foot on that campus, having early exposure, and kind of even my Upward Bound experience through Johnny Hillmarsh at Lemoyne College Upward Bound program provided me a pathway to understand that this is a place that I can be. And without that, my dad's worked there over 30 years, and so I knew that was always an option, but it didn't become real to me until I was around my peers and actually lived on campus, actually went to the summer programs and things like that. And so I think if more students heard about those opportunities as well, Syracuse University would be an attractive option.
Hi, my name is Michelle Sills. I thank you for coming out today. This was very informative, and it made me think a lot. My niece, she graduated from A&T and journalism as well. And she wanted to come back here because she wanted to be like Jackie Robinson. And a lot of her peers and people who have left Syracuse were coming down on her because she wanted to come back to Syracuse. And she was like, I love Syracuse. I miss home. So she's working at the newspaper now. And I would have invited her, but it's her birthday today, so I kind of forgot about to invite her.
All
but
good.
I thank you. It was like a big perspective and opening my eyes. I thank God for Also Deacon Cobb, who opened the door, like she knew she can go to SU, but she wanted to go to a HBCU just to go experience, but she always wanted to come back home. And I'm just so grateful for this experience.
That really touched my heart. Thank you. Please tell her happy birthday, and also, to stay encouraged, and that it means so much that she's here doing that work. You said she's a reporter? Is she writing for the paper, or she's writing for the paper? I mean, that is so important to have somebody who's actually from the community. What happens a lot with reporters is that, they go somewhere with the intent of building their career. It's a stepping stone. So they're like, I'm going to be here for 2 years, then I'm going to move on to this city, I'm going to move on to this city. They don't have that investment, right? And that's just the reality. They're just trying to make it too. So how much institutional knowledge does she bring, right? By being somebody who. Thank you all so much. This is great. Awesome. Congratulations to you.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So we've got the alpha and the building.
Right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Feel free to stick around. We're going to kind of shuffle out of here, but it's great to see you all. And thank you again for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.